This is a flea market child's rocker that my mom had gifted to us more than a decade ago. My daughter used to love sitting in it at Grandma's house, and now that she has a daughter of her own, I thought I would rescue it from the attic and get it ready for a new generation. With my first real inspection, this thing is a mess, with loose spindles and different species of wood used for past repairs. There's damage on the seat back and seat, and a host of other issues. You can see a patched in piece of wood on the seat back trim, as well as a really bad sanding job. There's also what looks like saw damage on the other side of the seat back, where somebody had jammed in a shim to fill the cut marks. The seat was also repaired at one time with a mismatched piece of wood and actually assembled with framing nails. Even the underside chair frame spindles are mismatched, the left side looking like oak when the rest of the frame was maple. With the different types of wood, the poorly glued seat, the saw marks, I don't think it's worth a complete knockdown and rebuild. I mean, I'd still like my new granddaughter to enjoy it like my daughter did, so I'll fix the bad repairs, fill in the cuts and cracks, sand the crap out of it, and wrap it all up with an antique white finish in the end. Looking at the seat back first, there are brad nails poking up from the spindles that seem to have the nail heads snipped off. These sharp pointy bits of steel have to go. I used an open round nose punch to dig into the wood around the nail, and then used a variety of tools to pry the nails loose. This rounded bottom specialty tool from Lee Valley does a pretty nice job grabbing the nail and rocking it free from the wood. This works pretty well where a claw hammer didn't have the nail head to grab onto. Again, I'm not sponsored by any of these tool companies, but I still give this particular tool a huge thumbs up. Once the nails were out, there didn't seem to be any glue still holding the chair back to the spindles, so it was pretty easy to knock it loose. My goal here wasn't originally to take the whole chair apart, so I just sanded the dried glue off in prep for a re-glued joint. This is when I noticed that none of the vertical seat back spindles were attached by glue either, so I just decided to pull the back off and fix a couple of those bad repairs while it was clamped up in my bench vise. I started by filing down the protruding shims that stuck out from the saw damage and rounded over the curved piece that led up to the carved chairback decoration. Since the piece was off the chair, it was also easier to do the rough sanding while it was flat on the bench. And I could then smooth out all those file marks, sanding scratches, and the rough wood grain. And also take a short break with some vintage Strohs from 1980. I'm sure it's still fine to drink. Because there were some gaps between the chairback tenon and the receiving spindle mortise, I decided to mix up a concoction of Titebond 3 wood glue and some wood flour to thicken the mixture. This is the same trick I use to thicken epoxy sometimes when building a canoe. It fills in the cracks and voids while still providing a strong bond between the wood surfaces. I added this mixture on the chairback tenons, as well as all the vertical spindles, and then had some fun trying to get all the pieces and parts to line up for assembly. A little tap here, a little whack there, and it finally came together. I wiped off any excess glue and then clamped the back together to dry overnight. The next day, I moved over to the damage that I caused by extracting those exposed brad nails. I felt that drilling in some hardwood dowels would make for a sturdy and longer-lasting repair. Using a Forstner bit to start a clean-edged hole, I finished up the drill depth with a standard wood bit, careful not to drill through the front of the spindle. Cherry dowels were cut a little longer than needed and then glued and hammered into the spindle backs. A Japanese flush cut saw then just trimmed off the dowels pretty nicely and they were left to dry. Well, it's time to get to the bottom of the chairback problem, pun intended, and fix the loose chairback spindles. A deep seat clamp will help hold the seat to the workbench nicely. It's one of those tools you hardly ever use, and it's hard to explain to your wife or husband why you had to buy it, but here you go. Video evidence for why you need one. I struggled a bit in trying to remove the old wedges from the base of each spindle. A chisel was about as useful as a flat-headed screwdriver on a drywall install, but a long drill bit did a better job tearing up the old wedge in the slot and providing room for a fresh expansion wedge and some glue. I cut some new wedges on the table saw out of a piece of mahogany and went back to the chair frame. The spindles were already loose on the inside of the seat, so I just hammered them down to make room for new glue on the outside of each spindle. Once hammered back into the seat, I added the new wedges and some wood glue into those cleaned out slots and then hammered the wedges down, locking the seat back spindle into the seat. I trimmed off any excess wedge material and then wiped up the glue. Here's where I'd love somebody to explain to me why they thought a furniture repair should be done with framing nails. I mean, come on, man. I had to make a decision here, namely trying to extract the embedded nails or just do a better job finishing them out. Since the glue joint was actually still good, I opted to dig out the filler from the holes the best I could and then set the nails deeper wherever possible. Before filling any of them in, I also cleaned up some of the bad repairs on the top of the seat, including doing some hand plane work to level out the one repair and to file out the damaged front of the seat in prep for some epoxy filler. All I'm really trying to do here is rasp out the damaged area, getting past the old finish and stain, and revealing some fresh wood that I can bond to. In this case, I chose to use epoxy and the same wood flour to create a thick paste for filling in those gaps. Painter's tape will help hold in the epoxy to the shape of the seat, and then I can sand it smooth when it cures. I should reiterate that I'm not really worried about matching the wood grain here. There are so many wood varieties and visible repairs on this chair that I knew going in that a painted finish would be required. So the epoxy will leave me with a super strong base to work with and sand against, which is perfect for a paint job. With the seat gap filled in, I also filled in the nail holes on the side and covered them up with tape, which smooths them out against the wood grain. 24 hours later, the epoxy is cured and the tape was removed. Everything's ready for sanding. I had to create a couple of custom sanding tools to get in between all the nooks and crannies, where the flexible foam sanding pads worked really well on the curves of the spindles. The orbital sander did a great job on all the flat parts, and I worked the grits down from 120 to 220 to get me to a smooth, paintable surface. I never shoot a lot of video on sanding because it's just repetitive, but after an acetone wipe down, I used Krylon's Fusion spray paint to cover the chair in white. Because of the intricate nature of all the small chair parts, it took a full can to apply a single coat. Most of the paint just gets wasted in the air, but 2 coats gave me great overall coverage. The painting process takes time and you have to go slow, making sure your spray nozzle distance remains at a consistent 12 inches away from the surface. But the results you get are quite nice on a well-prepared wood surface. After 24 hours of dry time, the antiquing can begin with some medium brown oil-based stain. In this case, I used some chestnut stain from Minwax. Depending on the products that I've used in the past, I get different results when staining over paint, so it's best to do a test on the underside of a chair like this before going all out. I didn't need to leave the stain on very long, so a quick wipe off was next, leaving behind just the hint of aging on the bright white finish. You can see the subtle change in the before and after picture here. After another day of dry time, I finished the chair in a clear satin spray product, also from Krylon, making sure the paint and the clear finish products would work well together. In the end, the chair restoration came out as good as I hoped it would, giving me a sturdy little chair for our new granddaughter. When she's ready to toddle and take her first steps, Grandma and Grandpa will have a really cool chair waiting for her. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Pretty please give us a like, a subscribe, and leave us a comment, as those things really help our videos get promoted on YouTube. All of our content will always be free, and I really do appreciate your support. Take care.